Hello, I'm Charlene Tait, Director of Development for Scottish Autism, and I'm joined by Dr. Catriona Stewart. Welcome, Catriona.
Thank you.
Your area of research has been girls and women on the autistic spectrum, and you've very kindly done a series of presentations around your research, and one of those areas is around employment. But we're just going to talk about some of the key findings from that just now. So from your study, what were the key things that came out around employment, Catriona?
Okay, well, what's quite interesting is employment over the years really has come out as a key issue for women. Along with all the other things, all the other areas that we touch on, the issue of sensory issues is a big one. The environment, so the working environment, strong lights, sometimes strip lighting, open plan offices, very noisy, kind of general sensory assault. Even things like colleagues wearing very strong perfumes. These are all things that can actually really impact on women at work. Yeah, that would be a key one.
And in terms of access to work, what are the issues around things like, for example, the interview process? Lots of employers have competency-based interview questions. They ask people to imagine scenarios and see how they might react in a scenario like that. Did anything come out around the actual accessibility issues around getting into employment in the first place?
Actually, that's really interesting, because that's not an issue that's particularly arisen.
Okay.
I mean, people have talked, mentioned. If you're asked a question about experiences, if women have had that experience, then they can talk about it. The difficulty really is being able to transfer that experience into a different context. That's the problem. So I don't actually get the impression for a lot of women that they have difficulties getting work. The big issue is actually keeping the jobs.
It's keeping work.
I mean, certainly quite a few women who responded to our questionnaire are self-employed, or they've left a particular kind of job and they've set up their own business, or they've gone into self-employment, because then they have more control over their working situation in some ways. It brings other challenges with it, of course, because you have to push yourself forward and call people and all the rest of it. But it really is the retaining the job once you've got it that seems to be the big issue for women.
Okay, so and is there also, we hear a lot about underemployment, people who are actually, I guess, on the face of it, able to do a much more sophisticated or challenging job, but who actually opt to take what might seem like a job well below their ability, and what are some of the reasons for that might be around?
Well, okay, so the stress and exhaustion that comes from working in a mainstream workplace, where people are being challenged to work to the best of their capacities. One of the things that seems to be quite common, or certainly has been, has come up on a few occasions, is this idea that people on the spectrum tend to be perfectionists. And if they're asked to do something, they'll try and do it to 120%. They'll give their all to something. If you're in a situation where you're being given a job that you've worked really, really hard to get very good results on, this a number of women have mentioned this. That they've worked really hard to do something to a very high standard, and then because they've produced such good results, they're then asked to do that same job. There's either given this job as an extra responsibility, or they're always expected to come up with that same standard, and they're asked to do these same jobs over and over again. Well, what's not being taken on board is that they've worked incredibly hard to achieve those good results. They maybe worked over their lunch hours, they maybe taken work home with them in the evening. So the level of stress for them has actually gone very, very high. And that stress and anxiety and exhaustion is one of the things that drives women out of the jobs that they're doing, where they're actually working to at least their capacity. So they often do seem to end up taking jobs where they have less responsibility and perhaps less challenges, because they're not going to face that level of demand. However, these same stresses can still arise even in jobs where perhaps they're not working to their full capacity, because it is the way of work that people are asked to work very hard. and they're still going to apply that same perfectionism to the task that they've got in hand.
So to some extent, some of the women are a victim of their own success. They work very hard, they work to a very high standard, and can become the sort of go-to guy for, you know, getting the sophisticated, complex jobs done because they know they'll be done well.
Yes.
So I guess there's maybe an issue there around assertiveness as well, and being able to say no.
Absolutely. I think for a lot of women there's issues to do with setting boundaries. There's certainly issues to do with assertiveness. Knowing when to say no, how to set boundaries, how to say, yes, this is my job, and actually, I can't do any more than this. The other thing is, of course, that perfectionism is also one of the things that sets them apart from their colleagues sometimes, and that can raise, difficulties, resentments, jealousies, or even just puzzlement because they're not joining their colleagues for chatty lunches or whatever, and it's not always appreciated that what they're doing is really what they're best suited to do, and so they don't necessarily get the rewards for that. They may find themselves, as they were at school, excluded or even targeted.
But it sounds like, in general, the women in your study are motivated by the idea of work and they want to work. So for maybe younger girls who are watching this coming through, for the people who support them, things around assertiveness and saying no and knowing your boundaries would be a great preparation for them.
If I had my way, Charlene, every girl, autistic or not, would receive assertiveness training. Because it's not about being aggressive, is it? It's actually the opposite. It's about knowing how to assert yourself calmly and effectively. Actually, it's about being effective. So yeah, assertiveness training would be brilliant. And then, of course, the other thing is just, again, it's raising awareness. Women were asked what they really, really needed at work. It was awareness and acceptance. So reasonable adjustments, again, not huge adjustments, just reasonable adjustments. Allowing members of staff a bit of flexibility. I have friends who run a business who actually have a worker they've talked about who they will come in late, and they don't worry about it because they know that worker will stay late to finish the job. They know they're hardworking, they're talented, and they're loyal. So they don't really, they're flexible enough to allow that member of staff to just come and go. And that we could do with some more of that, really, for women,
So in terms of making the workplace work for women and girls who have autism, there's this idea about reasonable adjustment, but sometimes employers are stuck to understand what that might mean.
Yes.
So there's a bit there about individuals maybe helping the employer to understand what that means. So, okay, I'll come in late, but I'll stay later, and, I won't have lunch, but, I'd like a little space over here where I can sit and be myself and be by myself. Is it that sort of, information we need to get into the workplace?
Absolutely. And we had one of the participants, one of the focus groups, actually had made up a card, which she had laminated, that she keeps on her desk. So that colleagues as well, she has something to actually give to people if she's been questioned and has difficulty responding verbally. I mean, she's perfectly articulate, don't misunderstand me, but sometimes when women are challenged, it can be quite difficult to find the words at that point. So she has a little card made up which explains to people exactly how her autism manifests in her. And she's found that really quite useful. I think one of the problems for quite a lot of the women that I've spoken to is that they are actually not disclosed at work. And so there's a kind of double bind there. There's lack of awareness. And because of that lack of awareness and misunderstanding, a lot of women are frightened to disclose. They're actually quite anxious that they're going to end up setting themselves up as being targets, perhaps. But then if people don't disclose and the awareness is not raised, then things aren't necessarily going to be made easier. So that is one of the key challenges I think we have, is just making it easy for people to be open about their autistic status. And
of course that comes with that idea of acceptance, not just in the workplace, in society. A much wider issue that we have in our hands, really.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? Yeah. Well, Catriona, thanks for that insight into the employment issues that impact on girls and women, and we can obviously direct people to your more detailed presentation that's also in the programme, so thank you.
Thank you, Charlene.